right, good afternoon, everybody. I think we're going to get started here. Thank you so much for joining us. Everybody having a good conference? Yeah. Great. A little bit louder. My name is Nancy Kaffer. I am the editorial page editor of the Free Press, and I am joined here on this panel by a man who needs no introduction, Lieutenant Governor Garlin Gilchrist, and Victor Hwang of the Right to Start Foundation, who I'm going to let tell a little bit about what he does because he'll do a better job of it than I will. So share with us what Right to Start Foundation is and the work you do.
Sure. So hi, everybody. I am the child of immigrants who became entrepreneurs who had to start a business just to be able to afford to put me through college. So I've seen the power of entrepreneurship to transform lives, my own life, the lives of people around the community. And so that really became a passion of mine, but I also remember how hard it was for them to be able to start and build this business, which ended up being successful enough to pay for college for myself and my sister, and all the sleepless nights, all the challenges of the family. And so when I got to college, I realized that the way that we think about economics and economic growth actually doesn't take into account folks like my parents. It actually treats them as like sort of footnotes to the economy, as opposed to the builders of the economy, the people that actually make stuff happen, to create jobs, to create wealth. And so I've spent my life really doing that. So I've been a serial entrepreneur and an investor in entrepreneurs. And then I've started to get asked more and more by governments and institutions and foundations to think about how do you build entrepreneurship at scale across whole cities and even countries. So the World Bank would bring me into a country and design their venture capital funds, for instance. And I've worked across the US as well. So then I took from that work, and then I ended up going to the Kauffman Foundation, where I ran entrepreneurship at the Kauffman Foundation, often recognized as one of the leading philanthropies in the world supporting entrepreneurship. But sort of long story short, one of the things I found at the Kauffman Foundation was that there was no advocacy infrastructure to fight for entrepreneurs across the country. That is, there were a lot of people that talked about entrepreneurship and small business, but they didn't really do much in terms of policy action and change. And so that's why we launched Right to Start. So Right to Start is a national, nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that seeks to expand entrepreneurial opportunity across the country for everyone, lift up the voices of entrepreneurs, and advocate to make a better pro-entrepreneur environment for folks across the country. We're active in 30 states now. We've passed legislation in 2 states, including just a couple of weeks ago. And we have 2 other states implementing our ideas through executive action. So we have 4 states now we're working with. And then we work at the local level with city halls, as well as state legislatures, and also Congress and the White House as well.
So this is what's so fascinating about your work, and this is why the Song Foundation has brought us here together to talk about this afternoon, is you're hitting on a number of things that are so critically needed in Michigan right now. As our panel is titled, Making the State a High-Wage, High-Growth State, diversifying our entrepreneurial landscape in every way. Your work is really vital to that, and we've got a guy here who knows a little bit about state policy and making things happen. And I want to, take the next question to you. We're going to get to you in a minute. Supporting entrepreneurship, that's kind of a term that could get tossed around. It's a good summary of what you do, but you mean some very specific things by it, and they may not always be exactly what people think of. Can you give us the nickel tour of what that means to Right to Start?
So the way entrepreneurship has been talked about for decades in this country usually is it's like a program, and we'll fight like tooth and nail at the city level, at the county level, the state level, the federal level for a program. And that'll be a mentoring program or an assistance program of some kind. And the issue is that entrepreneurs don't die from a single blow, they die deaths of 1,000 cuts. And that comes from everything, from the way the economic development system is designed, the workforce training system, the educational system, government contracting, healthcare, childcare. The list goes on and on. Red tape, regulation, all these things affect the entrepreneurial process. But we think about entrepreneurship as, well, let's fix it with this program. And that's not the way entrepreneurship works. So the way we really tackle it is by calling entrepreneurship basically a right. It's a fundamental right that every human is born with, the ability to access a fair opportunity to start and build your own business. And so to do that, though, you have to look across the entire landscape of policy to think about, well, how do we actually structurally change the whole thing? So it's not just we're going to fight for years on one specific program. We're actually going to look across all these aspects of policy. And so that's really the way we approach it. And so we've got a number of different recommendations across all of these different domains on how to make the landscape more entrepreneurial and reduce barriers for everybody.
So, Lieutenant Governor, one of the things Victor just said was childcare, which you don't always hear about talked about in the context of supporting entrepreneurship. And I think a lot of times, sometimes that cutting red tape, cutting bureaucracy is kind of, period, we end there when we talk about supporting entrepreneurs. Can you talk a little bit about why, because I know this is something that you were very interested in and intrigued by here, is why things like that are maybe not traditionally part of business development or business support or entrepreneurship are really vital in this?
Well, you hit the nail on the head there. So, come on. So we have to reimagine what we mean when we say something is business friendly, something is friendly to entrepreneurs, friendly to growth. We have to have a comprehensive approach. And there are so many things that stand in the way of a person with an idea taking the next step to turn that idea into a business. For some of them, it's lack of exposure to what entrepreneurship even is. That was my problem as a kid. Like, I didn't know what entrepreneurship was. I never met an entrepreneur. I didn't have any entrepreneurs in my family. I thought businesses like fell from the sky. But for some people, it's, well, I have an idea that I think might be good, but I don't have enough money to be able to try it, to afford to build a prototype or to launch my idea. Maybe I don't have the time because I have children I got to take care of. And I don't have a safety net to fall back on or some place for them to go that I can afford, that's convenient, that's reliable. Maybe I got to hold on to this job I have because this job gives me health care and me or somebody else in my household has something that requires me to hold on to that insurance for them to be able to survive. And so what I love about this framework approach that says we need to think about everything that could impact a person's decision and ability to say yes to their own idea, to say yes to their own ambition, say yes to their dream of access to health and wealth, and having entrepreneurship be a pathway for it. That's what you have to do. So again, when we're talking about access to childcare, making it affordable and reliable, the things that the governor and I have done when it's like, okay, fine, you might need another credential. Well, let's make sure that the price of school is not a barrier for you. Let's make sure that healthcare can be more available to more people in an affordable way. These are the things that we have to do that lay that foundation.
And sometimes things like that kind of get cast as altruism, like, oh, that's a nice thing to do. But in this context that we're talking about, and certainly they can be the right thing to do, but they're also very pragmatic.
This is about making money, okay? Like I want people, the right to start, the right to have a chance at building wealth is what this is all about. And everyone should have access to that right. There should be a barrier-free path for somebody to try. And I want everybody in Michigan to make a lot of money. Okay, I do. It's the best way to improve.
Oh, come on, that should get a round of applause, guys.
No, that's fine, right? Look, the way that you improve a person's quality of life is by raising household income. And so the way that, and there are pathways to raising household income. Some of it is through educational attainment is a surefire way to do that. But also, entrepreneurship can be a great way to do that if your business hits. And so we need people to be able to try that, but also like if and when you try, because are you an entrepreneur in this room? Anybody? Keep your hand up if you have an idea for more than one business. That's because some of your ideas ain't gonna work. So we need to have a way for people to try something and have it not work out and have their life fall apart. You know what I'm saying? That's what we talk about from infrastructure, support, apparatus, and that's what we need to build.
So, Victor, kind of rooted in this, and these are kind of buzzwordy, but there's like equity is really embedded in this work, and not in the buzzword way, but in a fundamental fairness way. Can you talk a little bit, you touched on that a little in your intro, but can you talk a little bit about that imperative for equity in the business landscape and why, again, it's not simply sort of a nice thing to do, it's connected to a lot of what the country's about?
It's a very practical issue, which is wealth creation. And statistics, and these are all, data has come out in the last decade around entrepreneurship that wasn't available before the last decade, yet we haven't responded from a policy perspective. So for every 1% increase in entrepreneurial activity within a county, the average household income across the entire community goes up by about $500. Almost all net job growth in the economy comes from new emerging growing businesses. older established businesses net zero or net negative over time. So when people talk about job growth, it's really the new, young, emerging businesses that drive almost all net job growth in the economy. And only 18% of voters know that, by the way, so we took a poll on that. And for every 1% increase in entrepreneurial activity in a state, there's a 2% corresponding decrease in the poverty rate in a state. People are often shocked by that. Entrepreneurship is a way to tackle poverty, and there's data about that. And so all that sounds great, but then you look at the polling, which we were part of at the Kauffman Foundation, around what do entrepreneurs actually think about the system as a whole. And 82% of entrepreneurs say that the government favors big corporations over them. And 69% of them say the government doesn't care at all about them. And so that's what we have right now, which is people feel like their dreams aren't acknowledged and that they don't actually even have a system that cares about them to build and grow their own thing.
69%, that's a huge number. So what does it take? I guess we'll get into what it takes to change that in just a minute here. But there was another statistic that was pretty intriguing that you've brought out, that in the last 5 years, the most prosperous zip codes have seen 11% job growth, while in distressed zip codes, it's been a 2% decline. Can we thrive as a state or a nation when prosperity is so, isolated?
It's so unevenly distributed. And look, smart people, talented people are everywhere, but opportunity is very unevenly distributed. And we've seen this come out. And one of the really interesting things in the polling work and the actual legislative advocacy work we've done is to see that play out, which is, for instance, some of the polling data, we'll ask people things like, one question: should every child who graduates from high school have the skills to be able to start their own business someday? And Americans love that issue, but the communities that go crazy about that issue are the most marginalized communities. The Black communities, Hispanic communities, rural communities, small town communities, they light on fire when you ask them this question because they feel like that they aren't given the equal chance to be able to start and build their own thing. And so this is, because these are marginalized communities, that voice doesn't come into play. And so we often just overweight people who have made it and feel like, well, of course, anyone can start a business. I hear that a lot from people who've had, of some success or privilege, who'll say, well, it's not that hard. Well, then you get to the people that actually come from places where it's hard, and they tell an entirely different story of the economy.
I think there's a direct correlation to what you talked about in terms of marginalized communities. Like, when you're from a marginalized community, like, you are a dream chaser because you have to be, right? Because what you do is you think about what a better life would be like, what a life with more for you and more for yours would look like. That's what sparks the creativity. That's what sparks the hunger to want to go and try something. And these are the kind of characteristics that we want from entrepreneurs, right? So it only makes sense then that we equip and that we instrument communities and individuals who have been left out of opportunity, designed out of opportunity, with what they need to be able to give themselves a chance, to give themselves a try.
So you have this sort of suite of right to start legislation. Can you give us the quick rundown of what some of those components are?
Yeah, we allow different places to customize a bunch of ideas. And so a lot of these were ideas that came out of the work we did at the Kauffman Foundation. And they really span the gamut from all these different things, from red tape and regulation, which is often talked about, to also government contracting, workforce training, healthcare access, basically even just opening up the system. So what we found in the states that we passed in is that the thing that resonates the most is the simplest of questions, which is, who's in charge of entrepreneurship in your state or city? And believe it or not, almost no states or cities can say there's actually someone in charge of entrepreneurship. And so now in the state of Nevada, they have created an Office of Entrepreneurship because of the legislation. It's a fully funded office. And they're in charge of providing recommendations to the governor and the legislature in ways to improve the entrepreneurial environment, to cut red tape, to track entrepreneurial activity from a data standpoint across the state. We actually have such bad data on entrepreneurship. And also targeting opening up government contracts for young and emerging businesses. And so these are the basics. So it's just basic stuff. And that actually got shared out by the Council of State Governments nationwide last year as shared state legislation. And so we actually have this as a model now. And then Missouri just passed it a couple weeks ago, which has different versions of similar themes, which is an Office of Entrepreneurship. And now in New Mexico, they created an Office of Entrepreneurship. And in Kansas, they're creating a director of entrepreneurship position as well, basically to own this issue. Who owns this issue? Who speaks for entrepreneurs? Where is the voice to continue to make things better?
And who can be held accountable to fulfilling the things that they've said they will do.
Exactly.
And in journalism, we're always really big on coming back to accountability and measuring results. So something we have in common with business owners. But there's a couple other pieces in that. There's a little bit about shifting support, because there's some things that I thought it was really interesting, because there's a whole suite of recommendations, and a state can adopt one or all or some combination or tailor them to work. There's a couple of other specific things in there I thought were fascinating.
Yeah, we have what we call 5% to start. And so it's sort of model, a lot of cities have 1% for the arts, and so they'll fund 1% of their budget for arts. And it's like, well, all right, that's a cool idea. How about 5% to start, which is of the major government funds that go towards mostly supporting established incumbent companies, how about just take 5% of that to help the new emerging companies get a shot? So government contracts, can we get 5% of government contracts to go to young businesses? Can we get 5% of economic development funding to go to entrepreneurial businesses? And that kind of thinking just really opens it up. And 5% of workforce training. And by the way, workforce training is a whole issue. $13 billion of workforce money from the feds. If you go through workforce training and create your own business and employ 10 people, that is considered a failure in the workforce system because you weren't placed in a job somewhere else. You should be, if you create a job instead of just fill a job, you're actually penalized by the workforce system. So there's a lot of things that are just upside down in the way that we do all this stuff right now.
So, Lieutenant Governor, there's this suite out there of legislation. What are we going to do about any of that here in Michigan?
I'm here for all of it.
Okay.
I mean, I think that, let's be a little more tactical. So, things, for example, we've seen federal action on non-competes, okay, which I think I don't understand how that ever became policy in the first place. The fact that you could keep somebody from pursuing economic opportunity because they're no longer with your company is ridiculous. And so that's something that we have an opportunity to do something about here in the state of Michigan. I've spoken to entrepreneurs or businesses that want to invest in Michigan from other states that have chosen not to because we don't have that policy. The federal action is important. It's something I'd like to see us reflect at the state level. So as an example, when I worked in city government in Detroit, I confronted this challenge specifically of the city, like the municipal RFP process, not being designed to help small companies be successful in it, and did a lot of work to switch to, whether it was like a problem-based RFP process or something like that, where the success criteria was based on your ability to address the problem and articulate a solution rather than incumbency, and sort of biasing against that. And so I do think, and we've seen impact, the governor and I, in making changes to our contracting processes that enabled us to enable more opportunity for folks. We've done it specifically when it's come to geographically disadvantaged businesses. We only saw less than 2% participation from minority businesses and others that were disadvantaged when we came into office. We took executive action, and now we're north of 25%, just in the span of 4 years, and we've not even gone further than this in this last year. We can take a similar approach to say that we want to set a new floor for the participation of growing businesses. Because the truth is, getting a government contract is a great way to grow a business. It's a way for a business to go from something that is taking a chance on a whim to something that can be sustainable, and again, create more jobs, create more opportunity for more people.
That's how my parents built their business. So they got a government contract from the state of Texas, and that leveraged into contracts with IBM, eventually Apple, Motorola, all that, because the validation you get from a state contract, you can bank that.
Yeah. So there are some well-worn things here. So look, I am really interested in this framework because I do see that in this conference this week, when we're talking so much about economic development and creating economic opportunity, I think everyone deserves access to economic stability and mobility and opportunity. And so having entrepreneurship be part of the puzzle and making a clear statement of principle and action that how we think about growing our economy going forward will be dependent upon how we support entrepreneurship. It's something I'm really excited about. And maybe that's because I'm a 2-time recovering entrepreneur myself. You know what I mean? But I think that there are more people who have entrepreneurship in them, but we have sometimes really trapped it within them. and not giving them the ability, again, the tools, the infrastructure, the support of other entrepreneurs in their community that can help them. That's why we're investing, for example, in creating a chief innovation ecosystem officer, for example, right? That position, and Ben's here, to say, how can we connect founders to founders? How can we connect entrepreneurs to entrepreneurs? How can we connect the people who, it's a different sensibility to want to work for a small and growing business. How can those folks know that those opportunities exist in Michigan and exist in different parts of Michigan? Building that kind of ecosystem is really important to us creating conditions for that success.
And you said he's here? Is he? Do you want to raise his hand?
Raise your hand, Ben.
Right, there he is. That's the guy. He's going to do all that. So Victor, when Missouri was the first state to introduce right to start legislation, and Nevada became the first state to pass it in 2023. Talk about what the conversations were after that legislation was introduced. Was there pushback? What type of pushback was there? How did you get from the starting point to the finish line?
Strongly bipartisan across the board. I think what we found is when this issue is up for vote, people across both parties love it. And the strongest proponents of it tend to be from the fringes of the parties, honestly. It's from small town libertarians on one side, and it's from urban progressives there are people that have seen how the system doesn't work. And so we've just seen, but it's also broad-based. I think in all the legislatures we've had votes on, it's been almost overwhelmingly bipartisan all across the board, and this was true in Nevada, it was true in Missouri where it just passed. And it's just very powerful to see, and they'll say that this is the first time we work so closely on things together, that they actually, in a time of great polarization, it's remarkable that they actually work together and agree on so many aspects of this. Just as an example, in Missouri, there were 2,000 bills introduced in the legislature this year. We were, only 28 of them passed, and we were one of the 28. Wow. That's how this was able to unite people in such a polarizing time. And the bill even specifically provides things like tracking different communities that have been marginalized and how well they access government contracts from a Republican-controlled legislature. So this is actually a phenomenal issue in a very difficult time, and it shows how much people want this. 94% of Americans say this issue is important for America's future, to give people fair access to start and build businesses. And so it's very powerful.
So how many states have introduced and or passed?
15 state legislatures have introduced over 40 bills so far, based on the right to start recommendations. And it's just continuing to steamroll and grow. And
how long have you been doing this for?
Only 4 years.
That's pretty impressive. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like wildfire, because it's an issue. I think one of the things we've done is a lot of what I've seen for a few decades now in this work is small business and entrepreneurship gets viewed as like a special interest group. But when you talk about it as an issue of human dignity, human rights, human empowerment, economic opportunity broadly writ, it's very appealing. To move it out of, hey, we're trying to lobby for a little piece of the pie, to this is about growing the pie for all of society. It's a very different framing, and it actually resonates like that.
So, Lieutenant Governor, we have a pretty big fish in our economy here. Obviously, the auto industry. There's a lot of focus on electrification, EVs, and the next generation iteration of that industry. Can you talk a little bit about how the balance between supporting and nurturing this kind of entrepreneurship ecosystem and also supporting the next generation of our main industry balance each other or even interconnected with each other?
So, I mean, when it comes to building the future, we have to both evolve from the past, but also revolutionize some things. I think that our incumbent industries provide a tremendous platform and jumping off point for invention, a tremendous platform and jumping off point for people to do new things, whether that is in mobility sector or something adjacent to the mobility sector. But I also think there are a lot of people with good ideas who work in those companies who have ideas in a whole other sector, who have an idea for a great services business, who have an idea for a great cybersecurity business, who have an idea for a great food business. You know, I mean, it's like, I think that we shouldn't pigeonhole people's ideas to the industry they work in. And so much of this is about people. Look, I work in software tech. My first business was a job and internship website, right? I mean, like, so people have a lot of thoughts and creativity. So I think what we need to do is, again, by looking to change the understanding, the accessibility of entrepreneurship, I just want a person with an idea to try. Like, Michigan should be the best place in the world to have an idea. I think it can be if we do this right. And so that is not antithetical, that is not adversarial towards the industries that made us who we are, that have given us this groundwork. That is a good thing. I would much rather have an incumbent auto industry than not have an incumbent auto industry. That's not a problem or a barrier. What I think it presents is an opportunity that we can leverage to say that because we have this starting point, we should be able to do more than places and regions that don't.
Okay, I agree. Victor, one of the things you talk about in your work is fair access to resources. And I think we all have a pretty general understanding that it's a lot harder to get a business loan if when you're an entrepreneur. It's a lot harder. We know that there's challenges based on background, or that the systems can favor more traditional applicants for loans and things like that. Can you talk specifically about how Right to Start impacts this particular issue and how it can change and improve those conditions for fair access to resources?
Yeah, it's an issue that speaks very broadly. One of the challenges is that entrepreneurship has become a privileged activity in our society. Mm-hmm. And so you can see this in the data showing up just in terms of like limited liability, like incorporating or becoming an LLC. Most businesses aren't incorporated or LLCs, which gives you the shield of limited liability protection. You can't lose your personal wealth if your business is sued. Amongst Black entrepreneurs, it's like minuscule the number that actually have the ability to pay for limited liability protection. It's something like 5 to 10%, depending on the survey you look at. And so we've made something that was meant to be democratizing, limited liability shields, and we've actually made them privileged. And so these are kind of the fundamental problems, and that means that we're leaving money on the table as a society. We actually have people with hopes and dreams, with great ideas, with talent, that actually are facing headwinds in just the way we've designed the very systems. And so in terms of capital access, that's a big issue. The research shows Black male entrepreneurs get rejected at 3 times the rate for small business loans, and that's controlled for all variables. And so the headwinds are very strong, and we've got to look at reforming the way capital is done. And that's like a whole day's conversation. But maybe the point is that the way the capital markets are designed right now, they actually don't reach over 83% of the businesses out there. The way that venture capital works is for the high growth businesses that can take off, which could be any kind of business when it hits that trajectory and finds some product opportunity. And then about 16% of businesses are bankable businesses. That is, they've got a few years of financials, they've got assets you can get collateral against. 83% of businesses don't have a lot of assets, they don't have collateral, they don't have years of operations, and they haven't hit a high growth moment where the venture capital system can kick in. And so we actually have designed capital markets that don't work for the vast majority of people building businesses now.
State government, again, reforming, like you were saying, banking system or making big changes in the banking system is a very complex thing, but there are things state government can do in lieu of that. Can you talk a little bit about?
Yeah, that's right. And this challenge of access to capital is one that we are trying to change the role that state government is playing in capital markets. So whether it's things like leveraging the federal program, the State Small Business Credit Initiative, SSBCI, Michigan has been one of the more aggressive states in leveraging that to create new opportunities for a much more diverse and broad set of entrepreneurs. We use SSBCI dollars, for example, to create something called the Michigan Economic Opportunity Fund that we launched last year in partnership with Michigan Women's Forward and other organizations. That is a $10 million fund that says that if you are an entrepreneur, a Black entrepreneur of color, a woman who is an entrepreneur, a person who's differently abled, a veteran. These are sets of people who have been classically not able to get bank financing to either start their business or take the next step in their business. So the Michigan Economic Opportunity Fund says, well, where the bank won't help you, the state of Michigan will be your partner. So you can take that next step to expand your hair salon or to build your prototype or whatever it may be. So this is us saying that we're going to step in and give you some of that runway to be able to get to that next chapter where you then may be able to get financing from another source. But we're not stopping there. We also did things like the Michigan Innovate Capital Fund that also leverages another set of resources from the feds that says that we have amazing research happening in our universities in Michigan. University of Michigan, my alma mater, the best university in the history of the world. It spends more on research. Y'all heard that? Yeah, y'all heard that? Somebody heard that? So U of M spends more money on research than any other university in the country, okay? But we have a lot of work to do to strengthen how much of that research gets commercialized. And so the Innovate Capital Fund is working to help commercialize more of that research to be able to put into the world. And those can turn into businesses that can grow and that can employ and that can inspire other founders. And the last thing is some new things that we're trying to build. Things like we use SSBCI for the Small Business Venture Capital Program that's put money up to $22 million in a Black-owned venture capital firm in Detroit for those businesses that are going to be on the hockey stick type of growth. But then also we have proposed in our state budget a $105 million Michigan Innovation Fund, which would be a first ever evergreen fund here in the state of Michigan. That a fund that would invest in Michigan businesses and allow Michigan investors to solve the problem of just having more funds available in Michigan that we don't really have enough of them, frankly. So that a Michigan entrepreneur or a Michigan investor can invest in the Michigan companies, and a Michigan entrepreneur does not have to go elsewhere to get the money to take the next step. That's one of the ways that we lose companies. Somebody, they got an investor that's on one of the coasts or investor that's down south, and they want or need to go where that investor is and have proximity. We have rich people in Michigan. They should invest in Michigan companies, and we should give them a pathway to be able to do it. And so we're trying to play a different role on that. We recognize there's more to do, but again, that Evergreen Fund, that is one of the recommendations in Right to Start. Mm-hmm. So I think we're trying to figure out ways. I guess I don't know if we was on that list. We should be because we introduced that already. So you should put us on there. We're 41. But we have an opportunity, I think, to really change the state's relationship. And we hope that by us behaving differently, it will also invite others to behave differently when it comes to changing their relationship with entrepreneurship as well.
We're at an interesting moment in our sort of culture where 4 years ago there was a lot of rush toward DEI as a practice across the board. Now we're at a moment where we're seeing pushback against this on university campuses and in other places, states introducing bills to ban DEI.
Not Michigan.
Not Michigan, but but a lot of this work is rooted in these concepts, which are really concepts of fairness. I don't think it can be emphasized enough that what you're talking about here is very practical. It's the right thing to do, also the smart thing to do. Talk about how is in any of that odd, conflicted cultural moment we're in kind of bubbled up in the work that you're doing? Give us a snapshot of what your experience has been, because you started 4 years ago, like right in the middle when we were in a different moment.
It was an interesting moment to start in the heart of COVID, in the heart of the George Floyd protests. And what I think is very clear is that we found a way to talk about inclusive opportunity in a way that's unifying for the country. And that is, and in fact, a lot of organizations now are looking to us in terms of how we talk about this issue, because we found people from all parties are actually very happy to get around ways of expanding and opening up opportunity for everybody, especially those that have been most left out, when you talk about it in terms that are distinctly kind of speak to the American DNA, which is giving people opportunity to build their dreams and create wealth for themselves. And so there has been a lot of pushback around DEI in terms of organizations working with different communities. The Black communities in particular have been sued by various firms. And we've found that communities actually still really care about it across party lines if you talk about these issues in ways that actually speak to deeper, more universal themes. And so it's a path forward. And what we found is this is actually a way to get things done. And you can actually bring together people who never vote together and never support things together when you talk about it in this kind of way.
That was interesting because you talked about rural businesses, and it's been, there's so many issues that impact rural and urban populations. They're for different reasons, but similar outcomes, whether in an urban area, transit that doesn't work great could be the obstacle of getting people to places, and in rural communities, it could simply be the distances they have to travel. And I was fascinated that this is a thing you're seeing across the business development.
It's actually one of the biggest issues in rural development right now. And I like to drive across the country. My team kids me about that because I get to visit towns and see what's happening on the ground in places and meet people. In rural communities, I'll give you an example. When I was at the Kauffman Foundation, I took half the Kauffman Foundation staff to Mr. Kauffman's birth town, which is a little town called Garden City, Missouri, a town about 1,000 people or so. We met the mayor, and the mayor said, yeah, we don't have any fresh produce in town because the last fresh produce grocery store, left. And so the people in town asked the mayor, well, where's the fresh produce going to come from? And they say, we talked to all the big chain grocery stores and asked them to open up a shop here, but they won't. This town's called Garden City, Missouri, by the way. And so they're basically begging big corporations to sell fresh produce in their town of Garden City, Missouri. And the question is, well, why doesn't someone create a fresh produce market in town? And there's actually an example in Nebraska, a small town called Ord, Nebraska. A town of 300 people created a fresh produce market because they had the same problem. Fresh produce market created by the middle school, and it became the only fresh produce available for hours in any direction. And so you can be entrepreneurial and fill these gaps in the market, but we've come to, it's almost a dependency where we say, oh, we have no fresh produce. Let's beg 2 or 3 companies to do it for us, as opposed to how do we do this ourselves? Yeah. So this is an issue in the rural communities as much as the food desert in the urban markets as well.
So we would love to take questions from the audience. I know I saw a hand up earlier. There's a microphone here. Just stick your hand up if you have something to say.
Let me add to that while you can read.
Sure.
So just to your question, Nancy, I mean, one of the things that we all have in common is that we all think something's unfair. Mm-hmm. And so one of the opportunities, therefore, we have is if we can understand like what people think is unfair and find ways to address that, that is something that can unify together. And this notion of like access to economic opportunity being fundamentally unfair and unavailable, that is something that cuts across. And I'll tell you, like whether you are in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan or you are in the east side of Detroit, there are people who feel like they may not have access to this kind of dream of economic mobility. But I think we can speak to these in really important ways that are going to be unifying. Like I really do believe that.
So yes, question for our panel.
Sure. My name is Ida Birdhill, and I run a startup by the name of Automation Works. And I am perplexed that whenever we design anything for entrepreneurs, we never talk to entrepreneurs. Because every program, I'm looking for capital now, and I haven't raised $1 in the state of Michigan for all of the programs that we have, because nobody asked me as an entrepreneur what I needed as an entrepreneur. And I'll give you a good example. When they gave money to Michigan Forward to do the CFI dollars, the dollar figures are so small, they're $50,000. Well, if I'm growing a business and I'm trying to scale up, $50,000 doesn't do anything for me. It does it for someone who's straight out the gate. But once you've gotten to a certain dollar figure, 50,000 is just, why even go through the headache of getting to 50,000? You need more money. Then when we go to other programs and you ask, they said they're technological programs, and then we limit what the technology is, what we consider technology. Well, I do ed tech, and anywhere else in the world, ed tech is a technology company, except for the state of Michigan. So my first dollar, I had to go to Boston. And even though I'm a Go Blue University of Michigan graduate, I had to be mentored by Harvard and MIT graduates because we don't see ed tech in the state of Michigan as technology. Then I just sat with the legislature a couple of weeks ago about $105 million that they're setting aside for startups. But 89 to 90,000 of 105 million will be going to the University of Michigan. No offense, Go Blue, that's my alma mater, MSU and Western, to do licensed technology or commercialization, which means that it only leaves 15 million for the rest of the startups. And if you gave only 150,000, that only covers 100 startups. But at the same time, all of this is going on. I've gotten calls from St. Louis for $1 million, calls from Tulsa to move to Tulsa for $1 million, calls from Texas to move to Texas for $1 million, and another call from Buffalo for $1 million to move to Buffalo. But yet I have raised not $1, not one, in the state of Michigan. Who talks to entrepreneurs when they're designing programs?
So one, I appreciate that. And that's why I'll talk to you. I think that the reason that we're having this conversation is because we have had an ecosystem that has not served enough entrepreneurs at different stages in an entrepreneurial journey, at different stages of your company's life cycle, and recognizing that there's different needs that happen at all those points. Like the purpose of this conversation and about what we oriented about this week is to say that we have an opportunity to fix something. We have an opportunity for more people to be able to grow here and for more types of people to be able to grow here. So, I don't want us to look back in a year or 2 or 5 and still talk about entrepreneurship in Michigan in terms of the people who we lost, in terms of the companies that went elsewhere. I want to talk about it in terms of our ability to be able to to not only hold more, but encourage more people to grow, for you to take whatever your next step is to take it here. And so that's why we had the policy conversations that we have. I think the tools that we're trying to put in place, trying to involve as many stakeholders. And I believe that you got to talk to people who actually are close to the problem to get to the solution. And so that's what this is about. And that's what this whole conversation is about.
Let me add one thing, which is the definition of what's a tech business and what's not a tech business. We work under old definitions of that. Sure. Because Intuit did a study and found that 91% of all businesses now are tech-enabled businesses.
Sure.
They're using technology to scale, grow, reach customers, sure, manage their systems. And so, which means any company has potential to hit it, right? And we still oftentimes in economic development thinking think of, well, there's the tech businesses, and then there's everybody else, which are the cute mom and pop businesses. Right. And the truth is, anything can take off, and any tech business can become a zombie business that never takes off. And so we've got to rethink how we do that. And that's a shift in thinking. The tools of the internet now, compared to even 10 years ago, are just so different now. Every business can just get on and sell to the world. And we have to shift our own thinking about what is a tech business, and everything's got the potential to be tech-enabled and grow and scale.
Yeah. Question here?
Yeah, I love the element of the conversation you're talking about, like the evergreen fund, and really what it takes to grow and scale these businesses is, of course, you start with an idea, right? But then it takes drive, it takes go-to-market strategy, it takes a playbook, right? It takes capital. We're having this conversation around where capital is abundant and flowing on the coast, et cetera, and having this conversation that it sounds like maybe, Victor, you suggested around like evergreen fund, and Lieutenant Governor Gilchrist talking about how there's elements of that. Like, would it be a crazy idea to have like a $100 million plus evergreen fund with but you need the playbook of like the Doug Songs of the world and all the entrepreneurs who have been massively successful being that guiding playbook for whatever industry you're in. Like, there are people out there that have been successful, and it takes understanding, like related to Ida's point, okay, we've gone from 0 to 1, but it's a different skill set in getting from 1 to 10 or from 10 to 100, et cetera. And these people exist like in Michigan, the ecosystem. And I think about how are VC funds and all these places set up, right? They have capital, but then they have operating partners who are alongside, whose job is to support the entrepreneurs and guide them on these playbooks. So is it a crazy role for the government, the ecosystem, to say, let's have $100 million plus evergreen fund and use the operators of massive successful Michigan to be the operating partners, effectively having the playbook for these individuals to steward them and have that evergreen, and that is a whole ecosystem that begets itself, keeping the capital, keeping the entrepreneurs, and growing the economy at the same time.
No, that's not crazy. Like, I mean, that's what we need to build. Look, there's, as much as we talk about the fact that we are working to change the policy framework, that we're working to change the capital environment, we also have to build community and have to make sure that, because when you are looking for investment as a company, as you know, with your business, right? Like, you're looking for money and you're looking for mentorship and guidance. You want an investor who can actually add value to your board. You want somebody who can connect you in another space or another market to get you 100 or 1,000 more customers, or the next $10 million that you need to raise. And so, to your point, we do have people who have those experiences in Michigan, but we have an opportunity to better connect them. And again, I get back to this point of like this notion of an innovation ecosystem and having somebody's job. It's not exactly like a sort of entrepreneurship czar, so to speak, but it's like we need to have people thinking about how we connect people. That human capital is ultimately where this stuff comes from. And we have sort of centers for it that are emerging and evolving and coalescing, right? Like, like what's happening in the city of Detroit and around it there's a reason why it was voted the #1 emerging ecosystem from Startup Genome, right? But we have emerging opportunities with freshwater innovation in Traverse City. We have emerging opportunities with life sciences all up and down West Michigan, from Grand Rapids to Kalamazoo and every place in between. We have a diamond particle accelerator that's going to make crazy stuff happen coming out of MSU. And so I think we have to connect people, though, with those experiences. We have people who have had successful exits who live in Michigan. We need them to mentor people. Part of this job is going to be, hey, for you to tell your story and then connect to others who want to do their version of your story. So I think what you're saying needs to exist, again, adjacent to the policy framework, adjacent to the capital market evolutions. To have that network is really what's going to take this to the next level. Because as I alluded to before, and as so many of you may know, like, founders want to be around founders. You know, you learn from founders. You might meet your next co-founder by being in proximity to founders. And so by building that network and those relationships, that's ultimately what's going to help us really take it to the next level.
I'll add on the capital side, like the LG said, it's not crazy, and that's what you're doing right now. What's the most successful venture capital market in the world per capita? Israel. Mm-hmm. How did the Israeli venture capital industry get started? A government-sponsored evergreen fund of funds. Mm-hmm. So a fund that invested into catalyzing and birthing the entire venture capital industry of Israel, investing in its startup companies. That model got copied in Latin America. The Inter-American Development Bank created a fund that ended up birthing or godfathering about 200 venture capital funds across the Latin American ecosystem. That was US dollars birthing an entire venture capital industry abroad. We are now, through SSBCI, the work that's happening in places like Michigan, doing that for the first time back at home, decades after it should have happened. But it's happening now, which is how do we actually build that capital ecosystem and marketplace using government intentionally supporting and subsidizing and kickstarting that process. But there is a strong role for government, and the rest of the world shows it. We should actually learn what our dollars have done abroad and bring it home.
That's a good point.
Another question? Anyone? Oh, right here.
Yeah, I was curious. Earlier, you had mentioned earlier about some of the obstacles for entrepreneurship. So I'm curious on the healthcare front. That's probably a very big starting barrier. So how has that evolved in Michigan? Have you identified areas where that could be improved?
Yeah, that is literally the reason why I didn't become the third co-founder of a startup earlier in my career, right? So I know what I'm hey, I live that life. I mean, the truth is, we have a lot of work to do on that. We have done a lot of work on just reducing the number of people who are uninsured. But I think that we do need to have a conversation about decoupling insurance from employment in Michigan. And I think by doing so, that does create the conditions for this to be true. So, I mean, we're making progress. We have more people covered under, things like Healthy Michigan and stuff, that even with our Medicaid redetermination happening, that has led to more people having insurance that is just tied to who they are, not where they work. But there's more acceleration that needs to happen. We're going to need some federal help with that, to be frank, which is yet another thing that's at stake in this election. So I am eager to take in all ideas about what we can do on that kind of portability. But as Nancy alluded to, they're just these building blocks toward access to entrepreneurship, healthcare portability, childcare access to portability, universal preschool, high quality public education systems. You don't have to spend your startup capital on sending your kid to private school because your public school is good enough. Like, all these things make a difference in terms of making this more available to people.
I think the healthcare piece is a great example of what is often sort of seen as an altruistic, like, nice sort of thing to do. And it's great. Of course, it is a morally right thing to do, but there's also that really pragmatic aspect that if folks aren't tied to employer-based healthcare, there's so much more mobility.
About half of people who thought of starting a business and did not did it because of fear of losing access to healthcare. And so it's actually an issue there's about, if you extrapolate that out, about half of the businesses that should exist that don't exist. That's about 15 million enterprises that weren't started, in part because of fear of lack of access to healthcare. So it's a big problem that affects everybody in the economy.
And I'm sorry, you had a follow-up.
I was just thinking, have you looked at states where, I was thinking, we spent some time in Massachusetts. Yeah. They had a common health, way back. So, we were in Massachusetts for a while, and of course it's a slightly different environment, but they had common health. They're known for a lot of startups, and have you looked at other states to see what can be borrowed rather than reinventing the whole wheel?
Yes. There are some states playing on the fringes and experimenting with this. New Mexico has created a fund specifically for people that are unable to get access to healthcare that are trying to start businesses. And so that's very recently. Utah is experimenting with a bill potentially that would let companies put their contractors on their healthcare plan like their employees as well. So it expands access there into group healthcare plans. And one of the big experiments during COVID was the subsidies for the Affordable Care Act. And that had a huge impact on people's ability because of the ACA, even with access to ACA, which showed a rise in entrepreneurial activity, it's still very expensive. And so giving people a bit of a boost around that has been, the data shows it's very powerful.
I think there's also some chances, again, we talking about innovation and creativity. There's an opportunity to think about a new kind of union around entrepreneurship, right? So we've seen freelancers unions that have existed in some states or in other nations, for example. You could imagine having a kind of collective that comes together to, again, provide that kind of framework, that kind of security, and those kinds of benefits that could include access to health insurance that give people the chance to be able to then go and try something. And so, yeah, that could be another model that could be available, and that's worth considering. I think we're going to have to be creative to solve this problem. We need to have an entrepreneurial mindset to solve what it's going to take for us today with more entrepreneurship. That's a good thing, and that's exciting. So I think we should take a look at things like that too.
In Maryland, they actually did a bit of a grouping of entrepreneurs into like a healthcare category and treated them like a group plan. Not all entrepreneurs, but certain types of entrepreneurs, and so it can be done. It's cutting edge stuff. It's on the edge, but there's ways to do this.
I think we have time for one more question if someone has one. Oh, come on. I know one of you has a question. No?
You don't have to beg.
So I have a question, I guess. Is it, it's sort of a lot of these things that are so common sense, like that more folks would take the risk of starting a business if they didn't have to worry about employer-based healthcare, or that more working moms could do things if they had affordable childcare, could potentially start a business, that people could grow a business if they had better access to capital, or if opportunity weren't concentrated in certain communities. It's very common sense things, but they've become politically polarized and politically divisive in a lot of ways. It doesn't sound like that's how it plays out when you're on the ground working on this legislation, though. That's fascinating.
This is one of the great unifiers, not just from a political standpoint, from a public like sentiment standpoint. And I found entrepreneurs, when you're getting to the business of building a business and all the practical challenges, there's so many headwinds you face. Politics really doesn't factor into it that much. And you're just trying to figure it out. You're trying to get the customer, you're trying to build the product, you're trying to sell, you're trying to manufacture, build, whatever. It's a non-ideological issue at the grassroots. Mm-hmm. And so healthcare, childcare, these become polarizing, unless, though, what we found is you actually frame it in terms of entrepreneurial opportunity. And so, for instance, we've had healthcare bills related to right to start, sponsored by small town libertarians, conservatives in this work. And that just seems counterintuitive because we think in terms of our traditional ideological lenses. But if you think in terms of, well, what are the problems they're dealing with in their constituencies, in their communities, you find that things like healthcare are actually not polarizing at all if you talk about it in the right way and you create the right set of policies.
So not only can we build a better entrepreneurial landscape, we can actually just heal our political divisions if we all do right to start. I mean, I'm being a little flippant, but I mean, that sounds like there's a real potential for people to kind of come together on things that should be common sense, often get kind of skewed out of that, and maybe we can bring that back into focus.
Well, that's one of the things that keeps you going. I think this, in a time of great division and polarization, this is one of the things that unites, and it's not a small issue. If you actually think about it, it's actually, in my mind, it's sort of our entire economy, which right now is sort of tilted against the person who wants to build their dreams and has a better idea for making something, for making things more valuable, for building something for the community, for creating wealth. We should be lifting them up, not trying to push them down. But right now, the system actually, it's not intentionally, it's just through neglect. We just sort of make it hard on them overall. And it's just accreted over decades of 1,000 cuts, right, over decades of neglect.
Okay, so thank you very much. You've given, I think, all of us a lot of food for thought. I want to thank our wonderful panelists this afternoon. Thank the Song Foundation for sponsoring this really important conversation. Executive Director Kalia Burke-Gaston for all this. And thanks to all of you for coming here to listen to this important
little
conversation, and hope you'll go out and tell everybody about it.
Yeah. I have a little present to give my guests here. So this is a Lucky Entrepreneur coin that we created at Right to Start, and this is a thank you for this, and it's a way to support entrepreneurial dreams. So it says, "I support your right to build your dreams," and it's something you give to anyone that wants to build something new in this world and support them to do it.
That's
so
awesome.
Thank you, LG.
That's awesome.
Thank you.